And good morning, most of all, our listening audience out there. Listening to the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour, every week you know one thing. We will have a top leading newsmaker. And by the way, when I say newsmaker, I mean a political, either elected official, a political newsmaker / opinion leader, or someone who is right on the point on a hot button issue. And certainly there are so many hot button issues these days in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill and beyond, of a political nature, and that's what we do on the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour. We bring you those that are making the news, part of the news, and sometimes are the news. Now, if you have been one step beyond comatose, you know, this week, the Obama administration, to be more specific, the White House, has been front and center again in the news. Why? Because a huge, as we well know, debate ensued over the tax cuts package that the Obama administration brokered with the GOP. Well, there were a number of senators, certainly a number of House members that had serious problems and disagreements with that. So we thought it was important not so much to go back over and revisit what's been talked about incessantly the last couple of weeks, namely the tax cut, what's in it, who wins, who loses. What's it mean for the Obama administration, the White House? What does it mean for the Democrats, the Republicans, and on and on? We thought it would be a little better today to focus on something that individuals, in fact, the general public just doesn't know. A look inside not only the White House, but the White House from the press point of view. More specifically, the all presidents. And, of course, certainly President Obama is no different. They have press conferences, they have press briefings, they have a number of things that where issues are on the table, they dialogue with the press. So on the Hutchinson Report today, our special newsmaker, our special opinion person, our special individual who's got an insight, and does he have an insight into the doings of the White House press room, firsthand, up front and in person, is Kenneth T. Walsh. Kenneth T. Walsh is the chief White House correspondent for U.S. News and World Report. And Kenneth has been a front and center at the White House, press conferences, press briefings for almost a quarter of a century. He's published a number of publications and books, and he's also won the Gerald R. Ford Prize for distinguished coverage of the presidency, 1992 and 1997 double winner. So we'd like to welcome to him Kenneth T. Walsh to the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour this morning. Mr. Walsh, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be here.
And certainly, it's our pleasure to have you on the Newsmaker Hour. Right off the top, as we know, this week, the major issue that the president and Congress has been involved with is tax cuts, but there are other things. There's always a range of issues from the Afghanistan war, Iraq, Social Security, and all the other attendant domestic and foreign policy issues that the president deals with on a day-to-day basis. And, of course, when that happens, the press room comes into it, press correspondents come into it, and Kenneth T. Walsh especially comes into it. So we're always curious, when you're sitting in the press room, and the president in this case, not Bob Gibbs, but the president is actually having a press conference, is there a protocol? Is there something that the advanced people brief the press on before the president comes in? And is there, say, a particular issue of the day that he wants to stress and that he conveys that, or the advanced people convey to Kenneth Walsh and the other press members?
Right. Well, there's a number of points here. One is that if you're in the press room day after day, hour after hour, you're in close contact with lots of the staff at the White House. So they will tip you off to something. If the White House wants publicity for something, which, of course, they wanted for this, let's say today as an example, for this economic package that just passed the Congress and President Obama is going to sign this afternoon, then there'll be a huge amount of advanced work on that. There'll be backgrounders, there'll be interviews with staff members and so on. And they want as much attention for this as they can get. So that's happening today as we speak, and I've talked to some people myself and wrote a piece about it today. But on a normal course of events, the White House sometimes wants to surprise people, the media, with things, so they won't tell you. You might remember when President Clinton and President Obama showed up in the briefing room a week ago. That was a complete surprise to everybody, including most of the White House staff. Very few people even knew it was going to happen 5 minutes in advance. And so that was something that President Obama and President Clinton developed at the spur of the moment, as far as we can tell. So that was an interesting moment for everybody. But most of the time, as I say, the rule is basically if the White House wants people to know about something, they'll background it, they'll tell you about it in advance, give you a lot of context and so on. If it's something that might be more troublesome, then they might not do that in order to get their word out and their view of something out unfiltered. So they might want to surprise the media with that so that the media really has to use what the White House says without a lot of context. That's very common for White Houses over the years. And ever since I've been doing this since 1986, that's the way it's worked.
My guest on the Hutchinson Report, Newsmaker Hour, is Kenneth T. Walsh, Chief White House Correspondent, U.S. News and World Report. And as you've heard him say, and certainly we know, almost a quarter century sitting in, watching presidents, various presidents, and how they deal with the press. Also, by the way, Ken, you can also watch yourself, and many of our listeners out there actually watch the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker because we are streamed on Internet TV globally. That's the Hutchinson Report, HutchinsonReport.tv. And, Ken, we have a great stream. We got your picture, a number of pictures of you in very, certainly flattering positions. And we have a great White House and political stream going through with on our HutchinsonReport.tv stream. All right. One of the things that the White House presidents, not just President Obama, all presidents down through the years have been accused of is micromanaging the press. Who gets called on? Who doesn't get called on? Is there a concern that I'm going to get, as president, a tough question, a controversial question, a question that maybe I might not even be able to answer, or answer in such a way that's going to get me in hot water? Oftentimes, is the press micromanaged by the White House, and not just the Obama presidency, but all presidencies that you have observed? Have you seen any indication of that? Because that's oftentimes a criticism.
Yes, well, this is an interesting dynamic that you put your finger on here, because before the president's news conferences, President Obama and his press secretary, Robert Gibbs, and some other staffers, perhaps David Axelrod, the senior advisor, will go over who they think the president should call on. And they put that in a list that the president has in the podium of his on the news conference, wherever it's held, whether it's in the East Room, which is the ornate room in the White House, or in the briefing room, which is the main press briefing room. So in advance, President Obama will know who he wants to call on. He'll have a list, and he'll go down the list. Sometimes he'll go out of order, and sometimes he'll throw somebody else in there. But he'll look at the list, and he'll sort of guide himself, looking name by name, and then he'll call out a name without even knowing if the person is there. And so sometimes, a president can get into trouble with that, because sometimes the reporter doesn't make it. There was one case where President Obama called on a reporter named Steve, and there were two Steves in the press conference, so both of them stood up and asked their questions, and there was a bit of an awkward moment there. But President Obama doesn't have any qualms about letting it be known that he has this list. Now, the questions are not submitted in advance. That's an important distinction to make. The questions are not submitted in advance, but the questioners are known in advance. Sometimes people might get a heads up that they're going to be called on, but most of the time they're not. But not to go on too long about this, but the other interesting thing that people wonder about is who gets called on. Well, if the president is giving a live news conference, he will reward, in essence, the networks that carry it live. So he will call on all the main television correspondents for the networks carrying it live. So you have the three broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. You have CNN, you'd have Fox, you'd have Bloomberg. So that eats up about 6 or 7 questions right there. President Obama talks at some length because he likes to explain himself, and he's almost professorial about things. And that limits the number of questions because the president is speaking, so there's fewer reporters get called on. So with President Obama, he may call on 12 to 14 reporters. Half of those questions are taken up by these so-called entitlement questions, and so that then if he often calls on a reporter from a liberal blog, excuse me, he often calls on a reporter from an African-American outlet. And so that doesn't leave many questions left for the rest of the media. So you can imagine the pressure cooker everybody else is in.
My guest on the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour is Kenneth T. Walsh, Chief White House Correspondent, U.S. News and Report. Topic today, an insider's look at the White House and the press